For it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am very excited. We got Michael here. We got the return of Commander Eric Tung. It has been a while, and I can't wait to get into it with you. Now, like I said, every show, while I am excited, you should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine and The Collective on Fridays. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section, and we will get to those throughout the show. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Get some intros. Mike, give me a 10 to 15 second. Who are you? Where you come from? And all that good stuff. Giver.
Yeah, retired Army officer, and worked in civil affairs and infantry, combat medic for a little while, and now working in a biopharma company and running my own YouTube channel now for United Veterans Worldwide, which talks to mental health and a wellness journey of fitness, nutrition globally.
Bam. Love it. Eric, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm out in Washington State. I've been in law enforcement for 17 years, currently a patrol commander, and really just trying to put out content to help cops be their best, help first responders and military folks. So Blue Grit Wellness, tag right there, the Blue Grit Radio podcast as well.
Bam. Look at that. Shaun, how's life in the mountains?
Things are good. You know what I was just doing? I was looking at both fellas' backdrops, and I noticed that Eric has like a electrical outlet in the far left flank, his far left flank, and a standout moment, whereas Michael has got all the things that I'm trying to scan and understand. Isn't it interesting how our backdrops can tell a lot about us or present ourselves to the world? And maybe that'll be part of the conversation today. Who knows?
Interesting. I like it. We're already in the mindset, and I'm down for this. So, quick one, Salty Jinx. Good day, all. Good to see you, Salty. John jumped in. Morning, all. Good to see you, John. I am stoked to get this started. So let's dive into it right off the bat. We're going to be talking about looking inward. And the reason I picked this topic is because specifically Michael and Eric, I was telling a second ago, the last time we talked, that's exactly what we talked about. So I want to get into it as a panel. When I sent that email to you guys and you saw that topic for the first time, what were your guys' first thought? Mike, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess the first thought was when we talk introspective analysis, we're really looking at who we are, what makes us tick, and specifically a lot that I've talked about recently is resiliency on my channel, and what makes some people resilient and other people's not so resilient, and that's a good introspective question, I think.
Absolutely. Eric, what are you thinking?
Yeah, for me, it's all the things that you can control, and you can't start to analyze that until you know thyself, right? So that's crux to stoicism. I think everyone that resonates with probably the majority of the audience. If you've been tuned in, you've already learned a lot about it. A recent thing that I've been finding myself reflecting on is growth versus fixed mindset, right? What are our limitations, and what are these narratives that we accept, or the people around us accept, or our organization accepts, and we don't challenge them, we don't meet them head on, and recognize that a lot of those are just these confines that we just subscribe to.
Yeah, I interestingly enough, I was thinking on the topic and I was like, know thyself. That's a great one. And then I looked back and I was like, oh, we did a podcast called Know Thyself. I got to quickly change the title. Shaun, you got, what were your initial thoughts on this?
So my initial thoughts were last night as I was going to sleep. So I saw the topic and I thought, oh, that'll be interesting. What's my first thoughts on that as I was drifting off? And I don't want to screw the show up. So I'll try to keep this fairly shallow on the subject. I'm just throwing it out there just as a thought. This is my first thought. So isn't it interesting how when we consider thinking about ourselves, our internal world, when we consider reflecting internally or who we are as a person inside, isn't it interesting that I do, and I think everyone does, we consider ourselves as a shape, like a little stick figure in our head. And we're looking at ourselves inside ourselves, our little stick figure body, or our version of who we think we are. So we have to create that in our mind, a visualization of what's going on in Shaun's mind. And I see my head and what's going on inside of my head. I see my mind, and then my mind just is kind of a thing, but it doesn't really have a shape. And so when I'm starting to think about my feelings inside, I kind of see not like an x-ray inside of my body, but I see generally a shape of my body and what's going on inside of Shaun. Whereas when you really consider it, if we're just a collection of atomically charged particles, or we're just energy wavelengths, or whatever we are, depending on how you want to look at it quantumly, or as we're all sitting here in 3D or digital dimension, we don't consider ourselves as being anything more than just inside of ourselves. When we think about inside of ourselves, we don't think of ourselves as being like in another country, because really our feelings don't have a container other than the container that we use. Our mind sets the container for our feelings and our emotions and who we are. Whereas the mind that's setting that container actually isn't even in a container. None of us are in a container. We're just existing, and we're limited only by our imagination of our limitations. And so that was my first thought as I was drifting off to sleep. I just wanted to throw out the idea that the construct that we've created in our mind is false, depending on how you look at the world.
This is a very interesting start to this. And I wrote down the representation of ourselves, as in, how do we represent ourselves to ourselves? I think this is an interesting place to go. Mike, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I guess the first one would be, I did a video recently where I superimposed an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder. And I said, what voices do we listen to that come out of our own mind? Are we listening to the devil on the shoulder that's telling us that we're not valuable? We're telling us chance no one's going to listen to us. Who's going to want to watch us or hear us talk, right? Or the other side that's telling us, hey, you've got value that's way more than what you think. And your contribution to the force still is as great today as it was when you were on active duty. These different voices we listen to, I think, if we listen to the wrong one, can take us down a different path, and that trajectory would be to a destructive end. And the other one will take us to greater enlightenment and greater awareness of the world around us and the people around us,
I'm liking this, Eric. What are you thinking?
A lot. So first I was grinning pretty wide grin because what Shaun said, he's like, oh, I'm having all these existential, like these really deep thoughts, like as I'm going to bed, which I'm like, for me, that's the opposite of me going to bed. If I'm sitting in bed, then I'm probably gonna be up for a while if I'm having that kind of thought process. But that's Shaun and the anomaly enigma that is Shaun. Man, I think on especially what Shaun said, when we think internally, but then we recognize that we have all this impact, it makes me think of influence and legacy. And that's a lot of what this show is about. That's why I get so excited to come on the show, because I think I say it every time, nearly every time for sure, but I get so much from this. And I recognize these are such healthy conversations, which is why it's such an impactful project. But also beyond the people that are listening or tuning into the show, I know that I have a lot of positive thoughts, ideas, energy that I can carry on and parlay into the people that I influence, right? That influence me. And so that's my family, that's my friends, that's my organization, those I work with and for. And essentially, like, it's just part of this greater whole. So as much as my initial thoughts are, yeah, where do you strike the I guess awareness on yourself, and how do you expand upon that? It is always part of the whole. Like, that's what we are. We're social creatures. We're not alone. And to what Michael said, it's just recognizing that you do have these, the archetypical, like, positive and negative conscious, right, or narratives. But a lot of times, to go into how you are perceived in the world, I mean, who's to say how you're perceived in the world? So many times we're really receiving and analyzing what we think someone is perceiving, right? Someone says something negative to you. Are they really saying that, or are you perceiving them saying that negative thing? So it just helps me down the rabbit hole that is this whole process when we get going on these big ideas.
I love these types of conversations as well. And interestingly enough, I was thinking that Sean's like, yeah, I'm just going to keep this really shallow while he's digging a 20-foot trench, right? Like, yeah, let's just dive into this, see what happens. On that note, to what you're saying, I want to put this first video up because I think it dives right into what you're talking about. In my mind, I think where it starts, at least, is conversation. Because if you don't even have a conversation with yourself or with others, then I think we get static. We get stuck in our thoughts and our patterns and stuff. So let's hit this video and then I'll get you guys' thoughts. Here we go.
Is about podcasting that famously, I think Socrates never wanted to write anything down. And part of the reason for that is that if you write something down, you don't have to remember it. Also, there's a sense in which the way philosophy is supposed to be done is through conversation. And so when you write down philosophy, what you're actually creating is this simulacrum of the ideal way of doing philosophy, which is through conversation. I think that's why so many philosophies are done in the style of dialogues. So like the Platonic dialogues, Galileo writes dialogues, Hume writes dialogues, and he invents these characters in order to make a philosophical point. Because instead of just saying, here's my philosophical worldview, they say, we're going to do this through conversation, because the best way to do philosophy is one person says something, another person asks a question and clarifies, and they debate. And so Plato's probably thinking to himself, as is Hume, as is Galileo, thinking to themselves, gosh, if only there were a way to capture
broadcast
the actual conversation.
Brilliant.
You know?
Fantastic. Yes. I've got to write it down like a script.
Exactly. The funny thing is that a lot of people say, oh, I used to read so much philosophy, but now I never read because I'm too busy listening to podcasts and stuff. And I'm like, well, hold on. What you're doing is you're trading the simulacrum for like how it's supposed to be, you know?
Bam. Let's get some thoughts on that. Eric, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I like where it went because I would challenge the notion that writing is not ideal. I think it's part of the process because as you write or as we write, if it's for myself, I'm trying not to go too deep and but I'll just let it go. I'm writing my thought at the moment, and when I read it again, I'm having a conversation of my prior self with my current self that's continually evolving. And unless I write things down myself personally, and I know a lot of people are this way, you're not going to be able to conceptualize or organize your thoughts in the same way, right? So I can talk about something, but if I write it down, I can further have either a conversation in my writing with these different either conflicting or collaborative ideas, or have that I can carry on into a conversation or into a conversation with my future self.
Let's build on that. Mike, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, the first thought was I was guilty. I was writing as he was talking. It's what I like to do. I take notes in bullet form, and it's very shorthanded. I don't know that helps me remember. Sometimes, I've had a TBI, and I don't know if anything helps me remember. But I think back to a journal. I used to write in a journal when I was in Iraq the whole year. And when I go back to that journal and I read that journal and relive some of those moments, my paradigm of how things were shifts. And I start to see it through the new lens of where I'm at currently. And I say, was it really as bad as I said it was in my journal? Am I reacting better now than I would have then? Would I have done the same actions now that I did back then? It really is causes me to question. As far as philosophy, I don't know that the philosophies of the world influence me enough that changes from what I currently feel and believe about who I am or what I'm capable of. I think that's something that's been taught from young and stayed with me since. So.
Interesting, Sean. What do you got on this?
I'm not going to turn into the word police. I just want to make sure that we're using language that works for everyone out there. So as Michael said, he grabs his journal and goes back and reads areas and is reliving that to see if he thinks about it differently. I would say that it's not so much relive as it is reconsider. And so if anyone's grabbing their journal and thinking, I've got to go relive my, March in 2000 and whatever, and see if I did right or wrong. This isn't a test. It's not a pass or fail. If you grab any of your former writing and you reconsider it as to who was I when I was doing that? Was I writing well or not in context of who I am right now? Does it make sense or doesn't it make sense? These are reconsiderations or self-reflections rather than trials and tribulations where you judge yourself for it. So And I know that Michael, I think we're in alignment there. I just want to put that out for everyone else. This is not me wordsmithing, Michael, at all. The second thing is philosophically, as I've at 61 this month, as I've grown up, my core is who I am, but my philosophies do change. And they're not so hard lefts and hard rights, but they are nuanced recalibrations of my philosophical trajectory, my understanding of the world around me. And so I do a lot of that philosophizing in my own mind, the mind that I was talking about that is in the shape of my head, that isn't in the shape of a head, is much bigger than that. So when I'm thinking about these things, I am considering who I was, who I am now, and who I might be in the future. So it's a consideration process rather than a judgment process, I would state. Now, as for writing, Chance, the video that you put up, I think the guy's name is Alex. Is that his first name, I believe?
I think so, yeah.
I think it is. I've watched probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 of his kind of longer form videos. I should remember his name. I believe it's Alex. And I really like how he puts himself across. He's a young man. He's well-spoken. He's well-educated. He was a debater out of, in England, I want to say it was maybe not Cambridge, but anyway, he was a big deal debater. So he speaks well, he thinks on his feet. And so as I was yesterday, not a planned script moment, but see that scribbly-doo that I have scribbled down there? That was me finishing off my coffee yesterday. I just grabbed the pen that I've got here and I scrapped a piece of paper, which is what that was. And I started scribbling down some things. And the things came about because someone had hit me up with, hey, I'm 25 and I want to know how to ... And I grabbed the pen and I thought, what would I tell someone half my age? What would I tell someone who's 30? What would I tell young Sean? So I started scribbling down some things and I just started bullet pointing it. And then I had so many bullet points, I started trying to find space to squeeze in another bullet point. Someone even sent me a DM on my Instagram account saying, dude, you write like a doctor. Well, I wasn't planning on putting this out to the internet. This was just me doodling. This was me running a thought construct, a intellectual exercise for myself to see what I was thinking in the moment, just for Sean. This wasn't for anyone else. That's why the writing looks like crap. That's why I was wedging points between points that didn't have space for that point. So at some point, there was so little space left on the page, a page that I hadn't intended to write, that I grabbed the digital paper and started typing it out. And I ended up with 50 points like that. And then I put the 50 points up on Instagram yesterday, and I've already received feedback from people who are saying, man, just keep on doing what you're doing. The ripple is rippling and it's all good and yada, yada, yada. And so, to my point, if I didn't plan on writing that, but I did, and now it's out there in someone's mind like a splinter, is that a good thing? That I didn't fully think it out? I think it is. I think it's good that someone else will fully think that out more for me, perhaps. But never, ever hesitate to grab a pen and paper and start doodling. Start doodling with your mind to see what's going on inside, to see where it takes you, to see if it is just a scrap piece of paper or it's something that you want to put out there for someone else to think about philosophically.
I think this the writing aspect of it, I didn't really dive into too much in my mind. I was stuck on perhaps the writing is the conversation itself, especially when you look at it inwards. As Eric was saying, when he writes something down and then he goes back, you can look at it. That's the conversation. Am I the same person I was yesterday or 10 years ago or 15, whatever it is, when this thing happened or when that day happened? And it could be something as simple as, I walked the dog yesterday, took my kids to school, ho-hum, whatever. But that moment in time, as Eric said, is now written. And I think that's at least a piece of it in my mind, is that becomes the conversation, at least to look deeper in my mind. Eric, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, even in the moment. And so I know I kind of illustrated revisiting it like later in time, a different you as we continue to grow, just changing by virtue of our experiences. But even in the moment when you're writing these things, I think that's so much of the power of journaling. And I'm not avid. I'm a diet journaler, but trying to do more of it. And when you write something down and you're physically writing those words and you're reading them right then in the second subsequent, it can be very powerful. And sometimes it's really positive things. Sometimes it's, on one end of the spectrum of gratitude. And sometimes it's really negative things. And that could be really uncomfortable. And you can sit with that. But if you're going to look inward, you have to be aware of that if you want to do anything about it, if you want to curb it, if you want to shape it in any direction.
I'm loving where this is going. Mike, you got any points on this?
Yeah. An experience I had yesterday, I was walking my dog. I was wearing my weighted vest and I was doing what I call my ruck talk. And I had my selfie stick out here and I was filming myself. And I realized that my dog had followed me up the road. And not even thinking, I'm still on camera and I'm getting mad at the dog. I'm like, dang it, why is this dog here? Right. And I kept telling her to go back, and she wouldn't go back. So I tried to get refocused again and got back on the walk. And then I see her stop and unload her bowels on my neighbor's driveway. And I lost it. I was just like, "Gah." And it wasn't until I went back in to edit the video to repost it as part of my workout and whatever yesterday that I saw my reaction and my behavior. And we talk about how people perceive us, or we perceive that people are perceiving us. And I didn't like how I was. It didn't have anything to do with writing, but I didn't like my behavior. I didn't like my reactions. If someone was watching me in disgust, like, why is this dog doing this? Right. I was embarrassed. I was like, is that how I act sometimes? So it caused me some introspective analysis to say, maybe I don't always handle things the way I think I do. I was on video. It was a hidden camera, so to speak, and it caught me in the moment. So, I think what Shaun and Eric have both mentioned, there are ways to relook at a scenario again and see if our situation will change the way we behave going forward.
I really like that, Shaun. You got any additional thoughts?
I do. And I think that where I'm going to take that is try to write unfiltered, try to think unfiltered, try to act unfiltered. So Michael in the moment was doing Michael until maybe he realized that he was watching Michael. And so the moment that we know someone is observing us is the moment that we refine our actions so that we're not demonstrating maybe who we are at that moment.
Yeah.
We shine ourselves up for the public rather than facing ourselves at our grittiness level. And so I think that's really cool what you did, Michael. I think it's good that you had that opportunity to see it for what it was and make adjustments moving forward.
Mm.
And I think that anyone who's writing, to Eric's point when he was mentioning that he does some journaling, we'll call it lightweight journaling. The journaling that we do, that's for us to decide how deep or how light or not we go. And so if you're having a conversation in your journal about the weather, you walk up to your neighbor, hey, good weather. What do you think? It's going to rain tomorrow? I think it's going to be windy tomorrow. It was sure rainy today. What was accomplished in that moment? The square root of 0. And so if you're having journal moments with yourself about weather, well, okay. If day after day it's weather, well, okay. Prepare to buy 1,000 books called My Journal. And maybe by the 900th book, you'll be writing something that is going to move the needle for your life. Forget about the weather. Forget about the weather. Start writing about you, the you inside of you that you haven't maybe explored yet. Writing shouldn't be a fairy tale if you're talking to yourself. That's for fictional novels that you might produce in the future. That's for your autobiography, perhaps. But if you're writing to yourself and you want to move your needle, you cannot talk about just the weather.
I think, though, and I'm going to push back on this a little bit, is the fact of what if you're talking about the internal weather, right? What if that's what, at least in my mind, this is what you should be doing. Instead of talking about like the external weather, you talk about the internal stuff. You go, man, I was really angry today. I got lots of hot air coming out of my face, right? Like that kind of stuff. I think at least that'll start the conversation. But to your point, Shaun, yeah, you really shouldn't be just ho-hum.
So if we want to use the weather analogy, perhaps you can talk about the thunderclouds that are coming out of your prefrontal cortex and hitting everyone around you. But you've got to be a meteorologist in that moment, or a weather person, so that you don't just say, well, it looks like there's another freaking storm coming out of my forehead. You've got to understand where the storm started shaping up. You've got to understand where it was a Category 1 storm before it came out of your PFC as a Category 3 front. And so just writing that someone, I was angry today, you're not even a weatherman at that point in your own freaking life. You're just a passive observer of, wow, I wish I'd have brought an umbrella.
I 100% agree. Eric, what do you got?
If I could jump in to provide clarity. Part of it is when I say diet journaling, it's not as routine as I would like it, because it is such a valuable exercise, right? Following Chance's lead, I got a daily stoic journal, and these are very good prompts, and they actually don't give you a whole lot of room to write, which is kind of a cool thing about it. But then I have my own like kind of freeform journal. But the part of my hesitation of going in is knowing that if I'm going to go in, like there's some work to be done. And so that you think whatever you want about that. But because you're going into the meat and potatoes and really where your psyche is at and really confront some of these things, it's diet in the frequency, I suppose, rather than the depth. And so I would invite people to think about that in these different systems. That journal, that product is something that I would really support, because it gives you these deeper conversations, or leads you to explore these deeper conversations that you need to. If I could cut back to what Michael shared, man, I really appreciate that, because you're like, dang it, dog, why do you love me so much, right? It's not that response, but that's what's happening. But really, I wrote down, you're captured in the moment, and that's what we're doing when we're writing. And if we put too much of a filter on it, to the point of the other gentleman, then we're curating and we're polishing the capture of the moment, right? But it has to be ugly at times, because that's where the work is done. And so, Michael, to share, when you're in this moment, you watch the video, like, oh, you feel shame, you feel judgment, but you were exposed of yourself. And I recently saw this thing. It was kind of a fitness influencer video, but basically making fun of the fact that he could be recording his workout and with the selfie stick doing his thing, and he's purposefully putting it out there for thousands and thousands of people to see, and he's totally fine with it. He knows it's happened. That's his plan. He wants that to happen. But if a neighbor looks outside, he gets super self-conscious, and he's faced with this, and he gets jarred up. He kind of has to stop it, put the thing away. Dude already knows that you're recording. Like, you do it every morning. It's just because you made eye contact, you felt exposed for some strange reason. But I wanted to bring that up and maybe get your guys' thoughts on it in this conversation of looking inward, and why do we have that dynamic when you're literally purposefully doing that thing?
It's only weird when there's eye contact made. It's not weird until then.
We tacitly agreed on not make eye contact in these moments.
Exactly. Mike, you got thoughts on this?
Oh, I've got a lot of thoughts. Maybe initially it's it goes back to the voice in my head of my wife, who, in my worst time mentally struggling with PTSD, my wife says to me, "Look, you're always like this. Why don't you start to write down when you're in a certain mood?" To Shaun's point, why don't I become a weatherman and start to predict what the future looks like? What's my behavioral cycle look like? And so I think there's value in doing some of that. And there's an app on my phone that reminds me every day, how are you feeling right now? And I'm like, I'm bugged because you just reminded me to do this, right? Yeah. But there are things like that try to help track mood. I think, on the other hand, to Eric's point, it's an interesting psychological analysis that has to be done internally that says, why do we act different? You know, I think when I did that video, I really didn't like how disgusted I was. And in watching myself, I was like, I really shouldn't have been that disgusted. You know, the dog was following me. She wanted to protect me, whatever. My wife always said that's my PTSD dog, right? So she doesn't know it, but she always follows me around. And I really shouldn't have been so out of line with my look. And I just thought, man, I really shouldn't have taken it that far. Yeah, of course, be a little frustrated that she did that on the neighbor's yard, but easy solution. I can pick it up and go my way. Yeah, I think there's a lot to it to consider here.
I love the fact that you both are putting names on things. I think this is really important in terms of your internal conversation, to be able to say, you know, it was happening. I watched it again. Oh, there was shame. Okay, why? And then, like, without a name, though, it's just, oh, I felt bad, or oh, I felt, and then you can shrug it off that way. But when you actually put a name to it and say, I felt disgusted. Okay, why did you feel disgusted? Then you have something to kind of grab onto and then work from there. I think that's really important. Shaun, you got any points to add?
I do, and I think really what we're talking about is just the commonality of the life that we were living in that moment. So if it's normal for the dog to follow you and take a dump on the neighbor's driveway, like that's the 400th time that's happened, it's a non-factor. Like it's not even a blip on the radar anymore, and there's no real negative response from you because you've managed it a whole pile of times. I would argue that the next time your dog does that, it'll be less of a big deal because you had the opportunity to face it the first time and then see yourself for who you were in the moment. That's a freaking gift, man. Like if you hadn't have seen that video of yourself, you'd be trapped in a cycle, maybe 10, 15, 1,000 times later. You're still angry at your dog, but you never see yourself as angry. You never see yourself for who you are in the moment. And that's the reason that I like social media to some degree. Because if I take one of these things and I start writing to myself, where's my feedback loop other than my own? I might get some, like if my wife passes by and sees it and says, well, that's kind of okay writing. Oh, that's good writing. That's bad writing. Now that's my yardstick. Is whoever's within my immediate circle in a three-dimensional space. But my digital space can give me feedback if I put it out. In fact, this conversation in and of itself is a digital feedback in real time with actual humans who are dialed into the moment that we're having right now. So we're all synchronous on this subject. I don't have to wonder if this is any good or not anymore because I've had feedback digitally outside of my little house. And so I think that your video, Michael, once I'm not sure if you put that video up or not, or you edited it or however you managed it, which is an entire process that we could talk about as to it's really just you understanding you and what you want to keep visible to the world and what you don't want the world to see, which is actually a proxy for yourself to some degree. How much you're willing to absorb of the fiery heat of your nonsense or not, whether you want to be real or fake, these kind of things. These are all great opportunities for us to grow in the moment, but there's no growth if there's no friction, if there's no growth, if there's no tension, there's no growth if there's no dog crap on the neighbor's driveway. And so we've got to put ourselves out there and kind of bobble it, like drop the ball, screw it up, go harder than we should have and get a few scuffs and then learn from it. So, Michael, I think what happened is super cool.
It really sets the stage for the conversation. Right? Maybe I should have called this when the dog craps on the yard. That would have been really great. I think I got another video primed up here and I want to jump into it because it falls in line with what we're talking about. But any other thoughts before we move on? Eric, good? Michael, good?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I edited the video last night and I did post it. But I took that part out because to me it was shocking. And it wasn't as much like I wasn't like yelling at the dog and I wasn't screaming for the neighbors, but it was the look on my face, which was genuine disgust and frustration. And I said, I can't show that to the world. Like that to me was overboard. I can get on my channel and someone can tell me a hard experience, some trauma, and I can cry with them, and I'm okay with that. But I couldn't deal with that that being out there. But the next time, like you said, Shaun, next time I think I'll handle it better. Be like, dogs do this. The dog followed me. Push on. Right?
Maybe not yet. And I'll interject. Maybe you weren't ready yesterday or today to post it, but maybe in the context of this, maybe you decide to snippet it and be like, "Hey, we're going to talk about this thing." You were ready to prime up the video. That's where I was like really struggling. Like, I was like, I do have something on the tip of my tongue, and I wanted to hold off, but in case I forget, this is exactly what I think is required to look outside of yourself in order to look in, because it required an external stimulus like this self-check through the video. And Shaun gave the example of social media being the feedback loop, or your wife being the feedback loop of reading that thing, and she's just like, hey, feeling a little dark, or this is super inspirational, and then you feel inspired, you feel rejuvenated, you're getting momentum. And so in order to look inward, you have to look exward, you have outward, externally, and you have to invite that feedback loop. And so that's a huge tenet of mine, is in the quest for ownership and accountability, you have to have those support structures and actively be like, hey, call me out, call me up. And that's what I love about communities like this. It helps you do that very naturally.
I could not agree more with that. And to your point, to your question about why do we engage stuff online? I think it's a lot easier because there's anonymity to it, right? Versus when you look at it yourself. And this video goes exactly into that. So let's watch this and we'll get right into it.
Not be humble if you do not know your power. If you do not know your power, you're not humble, you're just afraid. You're not humble, you're just compliant. The only person that can be truly humble is the person that knows their strength and knows their power, then chooses it to serve, chooses to empower, not overpower. I believe kindness is one of the highest values that I know that I have in my life. When you have strength and you're kind, that's where it perplexes the world.
And the reason I hit this one, and I'm going to go first on this, is just the fact that, as what we've been talking about, is having the humility and the kindness to be able to ask and accept external stimulus, right? Being able to put stuff online and go, what do you guys think? And then accept it, because I think, at least in my mind, that's where the power lies. What do you guys think? Mike, I'm going to hit you first.
Yeah, I would say that the interview I did with you, Chance, on my channel had a lot of success, a lot of views, and it's demonstrated the type of person that you are. And I think in our interactions and our calls previously, I could see your character pretty clearly, and it was obvious why people want to watch and follow you. So when we talk about kindness being the power, that you know your strength, I think that's something that's coming forward and showing. I talk to people all the time, and I had 3 calls before we met today with people that I want to share their story, their military journey, their mental health journey. And, humility's always got to be a part of it. And I always have an inward prayer that says something like, help me to treat their interview with the respect, the dignity that it deserves, so that I can share this story, their journey with the world. And I think that's part of what gives me the strength each day to engage our veteran and first responder community so openly, is to know already that I've already been down and I'm coming back up. Therefore, I don't hesitate to go right to the hard stuff and make people face it and say, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I did have an absolute blast talking with you. It was so much fun. Eric, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but I recently saw a clip, and I'd heard it before, but it was Jordan Peterson speaking on a weak man or a weak people, that are not asserting strength or violence, and how there's nothing impressive about that because you don't really have the ability to do it. It's the ability to impart violence. It's the ability to do these things and choosing not to, or to use your power for good. I think that's the similar conversation. It's not impressive, right? If you don't wield the power, you have no capacity to. You're just a nice guy in the corner, just doing your thing. But if you have the capacity to do good or evil, and you choose good, I mean, that's the stuff. And so that's kind of where my mind went on the last prompt, the video, and what Mike's speaking to is, having that ability, that compassion, that humility to channel your energy in that direction.
I think that was the you got to be a monster quote line. That
Yep.
is like, you got to be a monster and then learn how to control it. I
Yeah.
do. I
Yep.
totally agree with that. Sean, what are you thinking? Here it comes.
I don't know. I'm kind of torn on the video, man. Maybe I misheard it. Maybe I misassessed it. Maybe I didn't listen to it well enough. But this is my feeling that I took away from it. Was he was kind of being a bit judgy in the sense of, use your power. And if you don't use your power, you kind of suck. And now I'm paraphrasing, of course. But that's kind of the message I took away. Like, use your power. Don't be a loser. And again, I'm like extremely paraphrasing. But that's the feeling that I took away from it is you've got power, you got to use it. So then if someone young listens to that, they probably don't have the nuance to be able to like dial back their lever of go for the power because they don't even understand what their powers are yet. Like, as I stated, I'm in my 60s. I'm only just now starting to understand the tiny little power that I've got. And I've lived a pretty full life. Loads of people have said, hey, wield your power, do your power, 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 power. And what does that even mean? I've thought about it a lot. And I still don't have an answer. And so for someone to quickly have the answer of, you got power, bro, just go push that power. I don't think that's a very well thought out, not an argument, but a statement. So I want to believe, I want to hope that as part of that video, whoever that person is, I don't know. Whatever their background is, I have no idea. How they came to this conclusion, I want to believe that either before that clip or after that clip, they immediately launched into, but here's the thing. Everyone's still figuring out what their powers are. And you shouldn't start thinking you're powerful when you're 18. You shouldn't start thinking you're powerful when you're 61. What you should consider is the term power and not how to amass it, but how it enters into your life like slow drips, bit by bit over the decades, until eventually maybe you've got a body of work that is slightly notable that you can then use not as a platform, but as experience to make better decisions with the meager amount of power that you can wield initially. And I think it takes a long time of wielding power to actually start understanding what power is. That's my thought from the video.
Interestingly enough, Eric, I'm going to come to you in a second here, but that's the second video I've done of this guy, and both times you've come back and said, I feel he's being kind of judgy. On both videos, you use that terminology. So I love that. What do you got, Eric?
I didn't hear it that way, but then also what Sean's saying, I feel like some of your critique and some of your response may be illustrating the potential point he's making. And maybe that's what we could spin it into, is the combination of these conversations is that, yeah, when I was a kid, or, I say a kid as a new police officer at 22 years old, I was a kid and I didn't recognize the power that I had. And I had a lot of learning and a lot of reflection since then. But in the time and the context, when I was more humble, when I was more kind, that's where I exerted and had more potential power. So I think if we conceptualize power in the traditional sense, you could be absolutely right. But if we also combine it with these other notions that an 18-year-old kid can recognize a significant amount of power for his situation, for his context, for his environment, he could be a very powerful, influential 18-year-old amongst his peers, or even, leading up to adults. If he's humble and kind and open-minded and compassionate, all these things, then it's a different twist on power and maybe how we can look at it.
I'm liking it. Mike, what do you got?
Well, I found that quote that that Eric was talking about, and I really like it. Can I share it with you here? He says, "You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it. It's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war." And I think the concept around that is really know your inner strength, right? We said before, know your power, and know how to control it, know how to wield it appropriately. And one example of that would be I have 6 children, 4 of which are daughters. My 2 oldest are daughters. And let me tell you, when they start dating boys seriously and they're coming around the house, I want those boys to know that I'm a monster. And also to know that I treat my wife with respect and my daughters with respect, so that they learn that that's what I expect of them in the future as well.
I think that this is an interesting point on this is the fact that perhaps we were looking at it from a connotation of power over people rather than the power in our everyday selves. Like, for instance, Shaun, you have a power of being stubborn, right? The amount of power that you can wield just through that is massive, right? Being able to be kind, being able to be clever or quick-witted or things like that. Those are all powers that you can utilize. And I think in life, at least, especially when you take some time to look inward and go back to the topic at hand, is the fact that once you understand what that power is, then you can start wielding it, right? And it takes that introspection to understand that whatever it is a power. Because I'm sure when you were young, Shaun, and you were just a stubborn 18-year-old, you probably didn't see it as a power. You just saw it as being stubborn. But now in your 60s, you can look back at it and be like, man, that was a superpower. I am so glad I was able to be that stubborn in those moments to get to where I am now. And I think that's at least a portion of it in my mind. What do you think, Shaun? Come back to you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think you're right. I think but I'll say this, and this is just my opinion, and everyone can have their own opinion on this next piece that I'm going to throw out. I'm glad that nobody gave me titles when I was a kid, like when I was first joining the military. I'm glad that nobody said, Private Taylor, you're 3 weeks in, and we've noticed that you're extremely stubborn. You're going to become ... That would have sucked, man. Like, I'm going to throw this message out there. And this is I'm throwing this directly in the face of everyone who loves that slogan, be a monster. When you're 18, the only monstrous thing you're doing is probably running up a bill in your parents' pantry. You're not a monster at 18. And it's most men that pick up this title. Mostly men, be a monster. Most 40-year-olds aren't a monster. There aren't that many monsters out there. And so the moment that you throw that title out there, be a monster, it's easy to pick it up. Hey, look, I just picked up the title. I'm now a monster. You're the furthest thing from a monster. Wearing a t-shirt that says, I'm a monster, just means that you're $30 poorer. You put no effort into being a monster except when you're buying it online. And so, to be a monster takes a long time. And at 18, if you think you're a monster and you're telling everyone, be a monster, if you have a tiny bit of power within your peer group and they're tracking what you're doing and everyone wants to be a monster, and I'm air quoting right now, like you, it's going off the rails. To become a monster takes a long time. It takes a lot of deep reflection. It takes a lot of experience. It takes a lot of failure. It takes a lot of adversity. It takes a lot of decades, in my opinion, to become a monster. And so the message I'm throwing out flies directly in the face of what is being said. I think there's very few monsters out there, but there are a lot of people who believe that they're a monster.
I'm in agreement with it. What do you guys think, Eric? I'm going to hit you. What do you think?
I'm getting stuck on like what title or what are we calling a monster, right? And I think in the reason why I brought it up is the the ability to unleash, I know that we're not swearing on the show. You know what I'm going to say. But do you have this tenacity to defend that is which is most important to you? And for many people, that's their families. In the context that Peterson often talks about is masculinity and these root things. Is it your willingness to die literally or proverbially for what you truly believe in? And is it your ability to stand up in the face of adversity for what you truly believe in? Is it that, or is it to be like an absolute beast? Are we talking about, hey, there's predators out there and you're going to match and overcome those predators in a physical form? Because I know that on the show we could be talking about all these things. Or is it, hey, there's literally like evil in you are becoming that ability to do that and then harness that to overcome your own evil. And so that's where I'm pondering what these different notions might be, how to conceptualize them.
Welcome to the show where we answer questions with more questions. I love it.
That's philosophy, right?
Yeah, man. I love these conversations specifically because they usually stem into, well, it depends. If this, then perhaps that, and I love it. Mike, what do you got?
Yeah, I think being a monster, to me, represents discipline. Someone who's disciplined. If you are disciplined and you harness the masculinity, if we're talking about males, then we're talking about the ability to unleash violence when it's against opposition. Like Eric said, to our families or harming our families. I think in the other sense, though, being disciplined is a virtue. It's a good thing. It means mastery of the skills that improve life for you and life around you. In context of what we're doing on our social media accounts and encouraging people to live healthier lifestyles, we're encouraging in a lot of ways a disciplined mindset to build resiliency here and here, to help their mind and body become healthy,
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I think this is going to play into, and again, surprise, I have another video that this plays into. So I know we're a little short on time on this one, so I'm going to ask you guys if there are any other thoughts before we move on real quick. What do you got?
Sure. Very quickly, so that we can do the other video. I'll throw this out that to be a monster, B is a future looking, just be a monster. There's no obligation to what are you right now. It's always future casting. Be a monster tomorrow, bro. Start next week. 2025 is the year that you're going to be a monster. There's no accountability to the future you. So the phrase it's in and of itself, be a monster, usually refers to you've got some work to do. Start by making your bed. You're going to be a monster. And so, it's a long, long road to become what, in my opinion, a warrior in a garden is. I've got backyard tomatoes out back. When I'm out there doing my tomato thing, I consider myself to be a warrior in the garden. And it's not because I have a t-shirt that says warrior on it, which, by the way, I saw the other day in an Instagram marketing ad, a dude out there who has a t-shirt that literally just says warrior on it. And he's pitching master classes. And he's got zero background as a warrior other than it's de rigueur. It's the word of the day. It's the flavor of the week. Be a monster, flavor of the year. And so all of these shiny baubles that are dangled in front of us that we snap at and think, this week I'm going to be a monster. There's no obligation to become it. It's just the promise of something that I might engage in the future.
I think some people might need that, and it's kind of hilarious that you're being a warrior in the garden. And I don't think it has to do with your tomatoes. I think it's the fact that you carry around that sword in your background when you're doing your tomatoes to make you a warrior in a garden. All right, so we're a little short on time. I'm going to put this video out, and then we're going to do final thoughts on that video, and then we'll shut it down for the afternoon. So here we go.
Most brilliant things that was ever said to me by an extremely skilled psychoanalyst is so simple And yet, I do think it's the most fundamental thing to understanding oneself is that it's all internal, right? If you finish a marathon in first place, no one comes along and drips dopamine in your ear. You self-generate that. It's all internal. It's all about your internal representation. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't good and bad events in life, but the fact of the matter is that if you set the next milestone as just outside the distance of what you're comfortable with, and you make it there, if you allow yourself a moment to register that win, you get energy to then set the next milestone and achieve it. That energy is dopamine converted into epinephrine, into a drug.
Bam. It's all internal. Let's get some final thoughts on that. Eric, what do you think?
It's the perspective thing, right? It's what is your context and what limits are you allowing, or what limits are you breaking and shattering? It's what Michael started with initially. What one of his main missions is supporting resilience. And I think that's what the crux of resilience is you got this crud that comes into your life or comes into your people or comes upon you. What do you do with it? Do you overcome it? And then do you receive that growth, that actual dopamine from overcoming, because you have done the work and you continue to lean in and do the work? And for me, I think that's what it's all about. It's what a lot of our community is needing to continue to drive towards and support each other, and then also accept those small wins for themselves, because whether it's a marathon or whether it's waking up and calling a friend and having that hard conversation, it's all the same.
Bam. I like it. Mike, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think in turning outward, I think there's lots of moments where I've had dopamine. Chance meeting with you and talking with you the first time, I had a dopamine hit after we finished, and I've asked myself the question, why do I feel so good after I talk with you guys or others? And I think that the reason I do is that it's, in my mind, it's a new destination that I've charted. Where am I going, and how am I helping bring other people with me on this journey of wellness? And every moment I get to hear someone else's story, it's another avenue of experiencing that moment where they're being relieved of some burden, and at the same time I'm able to have empathy for them, with them, and together we benefit.
I love that. Shaun, what are you thinking?
Just building off of Andrew Huberman's piece on dopamine, I've been in enough podium moments where I've stood on the podium and I'm not on the podium anymore. I'm already punching forward into the next thing that I want to crush. And I think that the reason that I got pretty good at that, like not celebrating on the podium for the next year and a half, I was instantly iterating to the next thing, is because it took me a long time of wins and losses to get to a point where I could reduce my dopamine honeymoon period, where whatever I just accomplished, I wanted to stretch out like it was a big honeymoon event. I stopped doing that a long time ago. And my dopamine iterations are really quite rapid. So whatever I accomplish, the dopamine drip that makes me punch forward into the future lasts about that long. And so I don't rely on dopamine to help me do things, even though, of course, it's occurring autonomously. I can't control that. But I don't require the dopamine in my mind anymore to do that, because I've already done all the iterations to understand how dopamine works for Shaun. And so I'm not suggesting how I do it is how everyone should do it or anyone can do it. What I am saying in respect to Huberman is this: start figuring out how you react to wins and losses, how you react when you get on first, second, or third on the podium. If you like the feeling of third, you're learning about yourself. If you don't like the feeling of third because first is taller, now you're learning about yourself. But whatever is occurring in those dopamine moments, it's for you to think about it internally in that shape of your head, internal visioning, and think, how can I do this better? Never be victim to the autonomous actions of your body. All of these things are going to happen anyway. It's for you to get involved in the autonomousness of these things to better understand how to work with your autonomous internal actions.
I really like that. It reminded me, yesterday I was on a podcast with a crew called Level Up and Live, and they asked me an interesting question about, if someone's struggling with, looking inwards or getting better or whatever it is, someone's struggling with all that, what advice would you give them? And I pondered it for a second, and I thought, start measuring. I think this is the piece that, at least what you're talking about, Shaun, at least what I'm getting from it, is the fact that that's where it begins, is that you have to start measuring something. And the analogy that popped in my head at the time was, if I want to build a wall, or I want to build a house, or I want to build anything, the first action that I need to take, outside of planning things in my head and coming up with an idea and all that stuff, the first physical action I need to take is measuring something. How big is the spot? How big is the thing that I want to build? Whatever it is, it starts with measurement. And I think that, especially when it comes to looking inward, we need to start measuring things. You start tracking stuff. You start writing things down. You start put it on paper, and then you can compare it tomorrow and the next day and the next day, so on and so forth. So I just can't thank you guys enough. I know we could probably sit here and jaw on this for the next 3, 7, 10 days pretty easily. It's a deep, deep topic, and I know we barely scratch the surface on what it is to look inward. So we'll have to do it again at some point, boys. This is a great time. So thank you very much. It's awesome. Other than that, I got nothing else. Let's all continually, every day, learn, build, and grow. See y'all tomorrow, or Friday, actually. Chimo.